So now you are familiar with the annotative property of AutoCAD objects. So let's start by adding our own annotative object. So in this case, we have these dimensions and they are indicated with this green color, but right now they are simple dimensions. They are not annotative. So in order to make our own annotative dimension, I'll first turn off the layer which contains these dimensions. So that's dim layer. So I'll click on this light bulb icon and they'll be turned off. Now let's go to layer properties and create a new layer. So I'll name it as annodim, the dimensions for annotative object. Now let's click on this color and change this color to this one just to recognize these dimensions clearly. Okay, now we are prepared. So I'll change the active layer to annodim and now we can make our dimensions. But before making the dimensions, we need to create the dimension style. And to do that, I'll go to this annotation panel, select the flyout here, and select manage dimension styles. So right now we have the standard dimension style which was selected for making the dimensions. Now I'll click on new and let's give it a name. So I'll name it as anno, short for annotative, and here we have this annotative checkbox. So make sure this checkbox is selected to create annotative dimension style. Now click on continue and we have lots of values to fill here. In this case, I'll start with line, and here the baseline spacing is set to 1/64 of an inch. I'm not going to change this, and rest of the options also I'll just leave it at the default. I'll go to symbols and arrow and change the arrow size. Now this is the actual size which you'll see on the sheet of paper. So if you are plotting on an A3 sheet of paper, then you need to decide beforehand the size of your text, arrows, dimensions, and other annotative object, and this is the size which will always remain constant throughout different scales and throughout different viewports. So that's the paper height of these objects. So for this case, I'll select 1/4 of an inch as the size of arrow. Now I'll go to text, and here also I'll make sure that the text height is set to 1/4 of an inch, which it is. But if you don't find this text height as 1/4 of an inch or whatever the value you want, then you can click on this box and change the text height from here in the text style. Once it is done, you can click on apply and cancel. Now we have these values set. Let's go to fit tab, and here also you'll notice that this annotative checkbox will be selected, and obviously with the annotative checkbox selected, rest of the options will be inactive. You won't be able to change the scale. Here I'll go to primary unit and you can change the precision, which I'll leave at 1/4 of an inch. So these are the simple settings that you need to make. Now with these settings, click on OK and click on close. So now our annotative dimension style is prepared. Let's click on this panel, and here you'll see this anno dimension style active, and also you'll see this annotative symbol right beside the dimension which is annotative. In case of standard, we don't have that symbol. Okay, so we have this dimension style active. Let's start by adding the dimension. So I'll go to this linear, click at this point and click on this point, and there we have it, the first dimension. For the sake of simplicity, I'll click on this line weight display to turn it off. Now I'll go to this again and I'll add second dimension, and in a similar way I'll add other dimensions. I've added the required number of dimensions in this drawing. So right now, as you can see, that I've added these dimensions at the scale of 1:1. Here we have it. The 1:1 scale has been set while applying the dimension style. Now I'll go to the layout tab, and here in the layout tab I'll create the first layout. So I'll go to layout, click on rectangular, click at a point, and then make the layout. So there we have it. Now in this case, let's make the first layout with a scale of 1:50. So let's double click inside. I'll click on this scale and add 1:50. Well, there we have it. Now when I change the scale, the dimensions simply disappeared. That's because 1:50 scale was not added to the annotative property. Now this might be a little bit confusing to you, but I'll make this clear in a moment. Now let's go back to the model space. And when I move my cursor over any of these dimensions, you'll see this single icon of annotative property that indicates that current dimension style has a single scale applied to it, and that scale is 1:1, and it simply means that this property will work only in the scale of 1:1. In order to make this annotative property work in different scales, you need to add them. And in order to add them, you can use this status bar option. So the first option should always be active, show annotation objects. That will make annotation objects visible. And in order to add scales, click on this second option. So that will help in adding different scales. Now you have already made this drawing at 1:50 scale, so we need it. So for that, I'll go to model. I'll click on scale after turning on both of these options, and now I'll click on 1:50. And there we have it. Now the scale has been added, and you'll see a change in size here. Also, you'll see this double icon of annotative object that indicates multiple annotative scales are now added. Now let's move back to the layout. There we have it. We have proper dimension size here, and they are quite visible now. So this size is with respect to the paper. Now I'll go to layout 2. Here also we have A3 sheet of paper. Let's create two new viewports. So I'll go to rectangular, and here I'll create the first viewport. Let's double click inside and add a scale of 1:20 here. Well, there we have it. Let's zoom into this area, the kids' bedroom. There we have it. Now double click outside, and again we don't have the dimensions visible because we need to add this scale also, the scale of 1:20. But before adding that, I'll create one more viewport. So here we have the second viewport. Double click here, zoom into this area, and right now I'll change the scale to 1:10 because we want this area in focus. There we have it. Now we need to add two more scales, 1:10 and 1:20. So again, we'll move to model space, click on this scale and change it to 1:10. And the scale has been added. Also, we need 1:20. So let's add 1:20. So that scale is also added. Now move back to layout 2. There we have it. The dimensions are clearly visible, and when you look at these dimensions, you'll find that their size is completely consistent. Here we have 1:20 scale, and look at the size of dimension, and look at the size of dimension in this case in 1:10 scale. In both of these cases, the size of dimension is equal. Even when you move to layout 1, where the scale was 1:50, the same dimension size is maintained. That's because we have applied annotative property. Now, in most of these cases, the dimensions are overlapping or they are not clearly visible. For example, in this case, we don't have these dimensions visible. They are overlapping each other, which we don't want. But in this case, they are quite clearly visible. So you can change their position in different viewports separately, and they will not affect each other because they are annotative object, obviously. So I'll double click inside this first viewport of 1:20 scale, click on this dimension and click on this grip. First, let's double click outside. Now I'll click on this viewport, select it, click on this grip and move it a little bit over here. Well, let's move it a little bit more and press escape. Now double click outside. Now you'll notice that this dimension did move, but here in this case, this dimension remained unaffected. Also, I'll double click here. I'll click on this dimension and I'll move it over here. Again, we have 1:10 scale. The scale has not been changed. There we have it. Now it's quite clearly visible. In order to see these two scales, I'll click here and I'll move it a little bit like this, so that these two scales or these two dimensions are properly visible. So here also, when you go to layout 1, we can see that a consistent size is maintained, and here also you can change these dimensions separately. So I'll place it here, press escape, and there we have it. It's now quite clearly visible. So you can separately move this dimension also somewhere over here so that it's visible with respect to all of these objects. So in this way, you can create annotative dimensions, although it might be a little bit confusing to you in the beginning, but with practice you'll get really good at this. And in a similar way, you can create other kind of annotative objects. For example, if you want to create annotative text, then you need to go to the text style and create a new text style, but make sure that when creating the text style, this annotative checkbox is selected, and then you can select the height of text, and that height will be kept in all of the different scales. Similarly, you can create annotative blocks, hatches, and other objects in AutoCAD.